It was an ordinary evening at the small, cozy restaurant tucked between rows of old brick buildings. The place was warm and inviting, filled with the aroma of fried chicken, freshly baked bread, and simmering sauces. The lights inside cast a soft glow, making the wooden tables shine, and the clinking of dishes mingled with quiet chatter from a few lingering customers. The woman behind the counter moved gracefully, her hands skilled from years of running the restaurant. She greeted everyone with a smile and a friendly word, making sure each person felt welcome. She had built this place from scratch. Every morning she woke up before sunrise to prep ingredients, clean the kitchen, and make sure everything was perfect for the day ahead. Her restaurant was more than just a business. It was her pride, a place she poured her heart into. People came not only for the food but for the warmth she gave freely. The locals knew her by name, trusted her, and sometimes confided their worries over a plate of food. That evening, as the woman wiped down the counter, she noticed a man walk through the door. He was tall, wearing a leather jacket with patches she didn't recognize, and riding boots that looked worn from long travels. There was something about him that made people take notice immediately, an air of tension and alertness. He scanned the room quickly before settling into a corner booth, not saying much, just watching. She greeted him with her usual warm smile. "Evening, sir. Can I get you something to drink?" she asked, her voice steady but curious. The man nodded, his eyes scanning the room again. "Just coffee, thanks," he said quietly, his voice low but polite. She poured him a cup, noticing the slight shake in his hands as he took it. There was something off about him, a nervous energy that made her pause for a moment. She handed him the cup and returned to her work, but her attention kept drifting back. Minutes passed, and the peaceful hum of the restaurant was suddenly broken by the distant sound of sirens. She froze, listening as the noise grew louder, and then saw flashing lights through the window. Police cars screeched to a stop just outside the restaurant. Her heart began to race. She had seen situations get out of hand before, and instinctively she knew this could escalate quickly. Through the window, she saw officers stepping out of their cars, moving with purpose. They were looking for someone, their eyes scanning every person, every corner of the street. The man in the booth stiffened, gripping his cup tightly. She could see fear flicker across his face, and her gut told her that he needed help. But she also knew that stepping in could be risky. The officers entered the restaurant, their presence filling the space with tension. They asked questions, their tone sharp and demanding. The man in the booth tried to keep calm, but his anxiety was clear. The woman stepped forward, her voice firm but calm. "He's a customer," she said quietly but with authority. "Please let him be. He's here to eat, nothing more." The officers paused, surprised by her confidence. She didn't flinch, didn't hesitate. She looked them directly in the eye, standing tall, knowing that sometimes courage was not about fighting but about showing strength and composure. The restaurant, normally a place of comfort, felt like a stage for a silent standoff. The other customers froze, watching nervously as the scene unfolded. After a few tense moments, the officers exchanged glances, and, for reasons she didn't fully understand, they stepped back. Perhaps it was her calmness, perhaps it was the quiet dignity in her posture. It was enough to make them reconsider. They left, muttering under their breath, and the flashing lights outside slowly disappeared down the street. The restaurant seemed to exhale a collective sigh of relief. The man in the booth finally relaxed slightly, his shoulders dropping. He looked at her with a mixture of gratitude and disbelief. She returned a small smile, not making a big deal of it. "You're safe now," she said simply. He nodded, his eyes lingering on her with a quiet respect. "Thank you," he said, his voice low. It wasn't just a polite thank you. It was a recognition of the courage she had shown. In that moment, the restaurant felt different. It wasn't just a place to eat anymore, it had become a refuge, a place where someone had been protected when it mattered most. After the police left, the woman went back to her duties, trying to calm the nervous energy in the room. She served the remaining customers, chatting lightly, trying to return things to normal. But her mind kept drifting back to the man in the booth. Who was he? Why had the police been looking for him? She didn't ask, respecting his privacy, but she couldn't help feeling a mix of curiosity and concern. The man finished his coffee slowly, appreciating the quiet of the restaurant. There was no chaos here, no judgment, just a simple act of kindness that had changed the tone of his evening. He stood, placed a few bills on the table, and nodded at her once more. "I owe you," he said softly, almost to himself. Then he left, disappearing into the night. The woman watched him go, a strange mix of relief and unease settling over her. She had done what she thought was right, but the ripple effects of that moment were just beginning. As she cleaned the tables and washed the dishes, she reflected on the evening. Courage, she realized, often came in quiet forms, standing firm when it mattered, showing humanity when others might not. It wasn't about heroism in the movies. It was about simple, real actions that made a difference in someone's life. By the time she closed the restaurant that night, the streets were quiet, and the city had returned to its usual rhythm. But inside her small restaurant, the memory of the tense encounter lingered. She knew that this night would stay with her, not because of fear, but because of the unexpected connection she had made with someone from a world she had never been part of. Little did she know, that simple act of standing up, of protecting someone when no one else would set in motion a series of events that would change her life and her restaurant forever. The next day would bring surprises she could never imagine, and she would learn that courage, respect, and humanity could create bonds in the most unlikely places. For now, she turned off the lights, locked the doors, and walked home through the quiet streets. The city was calm, but in her heart there was a quiet thrill, a sense that something important had just happened, something that would echo far beyond the walls of her restaurant. She felt a mixture of pride and curiosity, wondering what tomorrow would bring and whether the small, simple act of courage she had shown tonight would ripple out in ways she could never predict. The next morning, the woman woke up earlier than usual. The sun was just starting to peek through the curtains, casting a soft golden light over her small apartment. She had trouble sleeping the night before, her mind replaying the tense moments from the restaurant. She kept thinking about the man in the leather jacket, the way he had looked at her with gratitude, and the sudden appearance of the police outside. It was unusual, almost like something out of a movie, and yet it had happened to her, in her own little restaurant. She went about her morning routine, making herself a simple breakfast and sipping coffee quietly at the kitchen table. Outside, the city was waking up, cars starting to hum on the streets, people hurrying to their jobs. Her restaurant was her life, and today would be like any other, or so she thought. She opened the restaurant doors as usual, stepping inside to the familiar smells of cleaning products and leftover food from the night before. The tables were neatly arranged, the counters polished, and the kitchen ready for the day. Not long after opening, the bell above the door jingled. She looked up, expecting a regular customer, but it wasn't what she expected. The man from last night walked in. He moved cautiously, almost as if he were checking to see if the police were still nearby. But there was a calmness in his steps now, a small sign of relief that he was safe inside her restaurant. "Good morning," she said, keeping her voice light and friendly. "Coffee again?" He shook his head. "Something else maybe, and thank you again for yesterday." His eyes were serious, but there was a warmth there that hadn't been present the night before. She nodded, understanding that he didn't want to make a big fuss. He sat down at the same booth as yesterday, and she went to prepare his order. While she worked, she couldn't help but wonder about him. Who was he, really? Why had the police been looking for him so aggressively? She decided it wasn't her place to ask directly. Some things were better left unspoken. Still, she felt a connection, a sense that this man trusted her in a way he didn't trust anyone else. That was a rare thing, and she appreciated it quietly. When she placed his plate on the table, he looked at it with a small, almost shy smile. "You didn't have to do this," he said, his voice low. "I know it could have been dangerous." "I did it because it was the right thing to do," she replied simply. "Nobody should feel hunted when they're just trying to live. Nobody deserves to be scared in their own way." She paused, looking at him. Even if the world seems dangerous sometimes, a little kindness goes a long way. He nodded slowly, his eyes studying her face. There was a respect there, an acknowledgement that what she had done mattered more than she could realize. They ate in quiet, the restaurant's usual rhythm providing a sense of normalcy. Outside, the city continued as usual, unaware of the bond forming quietly inside that small restaurant. As the morning went on, the woman noticed something strange. People began to look at her differently. Some customers whispered to one another, casting glances in her direction. One elderly man who had been a regular for years stopped by and gave her a small nod of approval. "I heard about what happened last night," he said quietly. Not many people would have done what you did. Proud of you." She smiled politely, but inside she felt a mixture of pride and unease. The news had already started to spread. By midday, the man in the leather jacket left quietly, leaving a small envelope on the table. She picked it up carefully, curious but cautious. Inside was a note and a few bills more than she expected. The note was simple but sincere. "Thank you. Your courage means more than you know. You have my respect." She held it in her hands for a long time, thinking about the weight of those words. Respect was a rare thing in the world, and she felt honored to receive it from someone who lived a life so different from hers. The rest of the day passed in a blur. Regular customers came in, chatting and laughing as usual, and she served them with the same care and attention she always did. But there was a new tension beneath the surface, a quiet awareness that the events of the night before had changed things. She couldn't shake the feeling that her actions had set something in motion, something bigger than herself. Late in the afternoon, as she was wiping down tables, the bell above the door jingled again. She looked up expecting another customer, but instead a small group of men entered. They wore leather jackets similar to the man from the night before, but there was nothing aggressive in their posture. They moved with confidence but also with respect. One of them stepped forward and spoke. "We just wanted to say thank you," he said, his voice calm but firm. "She protected one of our own last night." That doesn't go unnoticed. Her heart raced. She hadn't expected this. She nodded slowly, unsure how to respond. The men smiled, not in a threatening way, but in a way that conveyed genuine appreciation. "We don't cause trouble where we're not wanted," the man continued. "We just wanted to make sure you know that what you did matters." For a moment, the restaurant felt both surreal and warm. Here she was, an ordinary woman running a small business, being acknowledged by people from a world she had never been part of. She felt a strange mix of fear and admiration. Fear because of their size, their presence, the stories she had heard about bikers. Admiration because they were showing respect, not anger. Gratitude, not intimidation. The men stayed only a few minutes, chatting politely and leaving a small token of appreciation. A bouquet of flowers, some local crafts, and a handwritten note. They didn't overstay, but their presence left a lasting impression. She realized that courage wasn't always about fighting or confrontation. Sometimes it was about standing firm in what you believed was right, and letting respect follow naturally. By the end of the day, the restaurant felt different. There was a quiet energy in the air, a sense that something important had happened. Word was spreading, slowly but surely, and she knew that her small act of bravery had touched more lives than she could have imagined. She reflected on the morning, the man's quiet gratitude and the biker's respectful visit. It had been a day of learning, a day of understanding that kindness and courage could cross boundaries people didn't often see. That evening, as she closed the restaurant, she felt a mixture of relief and curiosity. She had done what she believed was right, but she also knew that her life was about to change in ways she couldn't yet predict. There was a quiet thrill in knowing that standing up for someone could ripple outward, affecting people she had never met and situations she had never imagined. Walking home through the dimly lit streets, she thought about the events of the past 24 hours. She had faced tension, fear, and uncertainty, but she had also witnessed respect, gratitude, and human connection. The city was full of stories, many of which went unnoticed, but she had been part of one that mattered. One small act, one decision to protect another human being, had created a chain reaction that would continue to unfold. By the time she reached her apartment, she felt tired, but strangely energized. Her life had a rhythm, a purpose, and now a story that was unfolding beyond her own understanding. She sat by the window, looking out at the city lights, thinking about the man in the leather jacket, the bikers who had come to her restaurant, and the people she served every day. She realized that courage was not about the absence of fear, but the decision to act despite it. That night, she slept with a sense of quiet satisfaction. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, its own surprises, but she was ready. She had faced fear, uncertainty, and tension, and had come through with dignity and compassion, and she knew that whatever happened next, she had already made a difference. The next morning, the woman woke up feeling a mixture of curiosity and unease. She couldn't stop thinking about the previous day, about the man in the leather jacket and the bikers who had come to her restaurant. She wondered if they would come back, and if so, in what way. Her mind was full of questions, but she pushed them aside as she prepared for another day at her restaurant. When she arrived, she noticed something unusual immediately. Outside, parked along the street, were motorcycles, dozens of them. Their chrome gleamed in the early morning sun, and the engines were silent but imposing. She blinked, stepping closer to the window, heart pounding. It was hard to believe, but it looked like a gathering of bikers right outside her restaurant. The bell above the door jingled, and she stepped inside to open for business. One by one, bikers began to walk into her restaurant. She expected anger, tension, maybe even confrontation, but to her surprise, they were calm, quiet, and respectful. Each one gave a small nod or a smile as they passed by, not causing any trouble, not disturbing the customers who had already started their day. The woman felt her stomach tighten. This was far beyond what she had imagined. She had protected one man the night before, but she never thought his friends or perhaps his community would come in such numbers. Yet as she looked around, she realized they weren't here to intimidate her. They were here to show appreciation. The leader of the group, a tall man with a steady gaze and a kind smile, stepped forward. "We just want to say thank you," he said in a calm, firm voice. "What you did yesterday matters to us. You protected one of our own when no one else would. That doesn't go unnoticed." The woman felt a strange mix of fear and relief. She nodded slowly, unsure what to say. Words felt inadequate for the moment. She had expected confrontation, not gratitude. And yet here they were, offering respect instead of anger. Some of the bikers carried small gifts, flowers, handmade crafts, even a few envelopes of money as tokens of appreciation. They placed them carefully on the counter or on empty tables, not expecting anything in return. They spoke to her politely, asking questions about the restaurant, complimenting the food, and sharing quiet stories about their travels. Their presence, which she had feared might bring chaos, instead filled the room with an unusual warmth. The customers who had been in the restaurant earlier looked nervous at first, unsure how to react. But as the bikers settled in quietly, smiles replaced tension. The atmosphere shifted from fear to curiosity, from unease to a kind of cautious admiration. Some of the regulars whispered to one another about the events of the previous night. Amazed at the bravery she had shown, throughout the morning, the woman served food and drinks with her usual care, all while keeping an eye on the bikers. She noticed that they respected her space, treated the other customers with courtesy, and spoke quietly when interacting with her. It was clear that they had their own rules and codes, and she was beginning to see a side of them that most people never saw, the side of loyalty, respect, and honor. At one point, one of the bikers approached her. He was younger, perhaps new to the group, and looked at her with genuine curiosity. "You didn't have to protect him," he said quietly. "Most people would have been too afraid." "Why did you?" She paused, thinking carefully. "Because it was the right thing to do," she replied simply. "Nobody should be hunted or scared when they're just trying to live. I've seen too much fear in the world. Sometimes all it takes is one person to step in. That's all." The young man nodded, clearly moved by her words. "Most people don't understand that," he said. "They only see who we are on the outside, not what's inside. You saw the person, not the patches or the jackets. That matters." Her heart swelled with a quiet pride. She had not expected to receive such understanding, especially from people whose lives were so different from her own. In that moment, she realized that courage and kindness were universal. They crossed boundaries, bridged worlds, and created respect where it might never have existed otherwise. As the morning turned into afternoon, more bikers arrived. Some stayed only a few minutes, others lingered longer, chatting quietly with her, asking about the restaurant and telling small stories about their journeys. They were not the wild, uncontrollable people she had imagined from the stories she had heard. They were human, just like anyone else, capable of gratitude, honor, and loyalty. By lunchtime, the restaurant was filled with a new energy. The regular customers had adjusted, watching with fascination as this unusual gathering unfolded. Conversations flowed naturally, smiles were shared, and laughter even broke out occasionally. The woman moved gracefully, serving food, cleaning tables, and keeping the restaurant running smoothly despite the unexpected crowd. She realized that her actions had created something extraordinary, a moment of connection between worlds that were rarely seen together. The leader of the group returned to speak with her privately. "We don't often meet people who act without fear," he said quietly. "What you did, it wasn't easy. You could have said no or walked away. Instead, you stood up. That's why we came today, to show respect and gratitude. You have earned our trust. The woman nodded, touched by his words. Trust was rare even in her own community, and she recognized the significance of what he was saying. This was not just about gratitude. It was about recognizing her as someone who shared their values of honor and respect, even without the leather patches or motorcycles. Over the next few hours, the bikers began to leave, some slowly, some quickly, each giving her a small nod or wave. She watched as they mounted their motorcycles and rode away, engines roaring softly, leaving behind a quiet but lasting impression. The restaurant felt calm again, but the energy lingered, a sense that something extraordinary had happened, something that would be remembered by all who had been present. After the last customer left, she sat at a table, exhausted but reflective. She thought about the man from the night before, the bikers who had arrived in waves, and the lessons she had learned. Courage was not about fighting or confrontation. It was about standing firm when it mattered, protecting what was right and respecting others as human beings. She had seen that respect returned tenfold in ways she could not have imagined. She realized, too, that her restaurant had become more than just a place to eat. It had become a sanctuary, a place where kindness and courage could meet loyalty and respect. People came not only for the food but for the story of how one woman had stood up when others might have turned away. That story was growing, spreading quietly through the city, and she felt honored to be part of it. As she cleaned the last dishes and locked the doors for the evening, she reflected on the day's events. She had faced uncertainty, fear, and the unknown, but she had also witnessed gratitude, respect, and human connection. The world outside was unpredictable, but inside her restaurant she had seen what was possible when people acted with integrity and courage. Walking home that evening, she felt a quiet sense of fulfillment. The motorcycles and bikers were gone, but the memory of their visit remained, a reminder of the unusual and unexpected bonds that could form when people acted with kindness. She knew her life had changed even in small ways, and that the events of the day would stay with her forever. That night, as she lay in bed, she thought about the ripple effects of her actions. One decision, one act of courage had created a chain reaction that reached beyond her understanding. She had faced fear, uncertainty, and danger, yet what emerged was respect, trust, and human connection. And she knew that the days ahead would continue to surprise her, showing her that even the smallest acts of bravery could have powerful consequences. The city outside her window was quiet, but inside her heart there was a sense of anticipation. She had learned that courage could change perceptions, that respect could cross boundaries, and that standing up for what was right could create bonds that transcended worlds. Tomorrow, she thought, might bring more challenges, more unexpected visitors, and perhaps even more lessons. But she was ready. She had discovered something invaluable, that human connection and courage could exist in the most unlikely places, and that her actions had made a real difference. The following days brought a new rhythm to the woman's life, one that was both familiar and strangely different. The morning sun rose over the city as usual, but she noticed that people began to look at her differently. Some of the regular customers whispered as they walked in, exchanging knowing glances. Others came over to smile, nod, or quietly say, "We heard about what you did." The woman kept her calm, serving food and drinks with her usual care, but inside she felt a mix of pride and apprehension. Word of her courage had started to spread beyond her small neighborhood, and she realized that her actions had begun to ripple further than she expected. The restaurant continued to draw attention, both from locals and from people curious about the story. Some came out of curiosity, others out of admiration. At first, the woman worried about the attention. She had never sought recognition or praise. Her life was simple, her focus on serving good food and providing a welcoming space for her community. But gradually she began to see that this attention was not just about her. It was about something bigger. It was about respect, courage, and the human connections that could grow from small acts of kindness. One afternoon, as she prepared a plate for a regular customer, the bell above the door jingled again. She looked up and saw a familiar sight. Several bikers she had met over the past few days standing quietly near the entrance. They didn't come with the large group from before, but their presence was still commanding. She felt a momentary twinge of nervousness, but quickly reminded herself that these were people she had already interacted with. people who respected her. The leader of the group approached her. "We wanted to stop by," he said, his voice calm and respectful. "We've been talking about the events of the past week and we all agree. What you did deserves recognition." He smiled, not in a boastful way, but with genuine sincerity. "It's not just about protecting one of us. It's about standing for something larger. Integrity, respect, humanity. That's what matters to us, and you showed it." The woman felt a warmth spread through her chest. She had never considered herself a hero or someone deserving of admiration. She simply acted according to her principles. But hearing this from people she had once feared, people from a world so different from her own, made her understand the power of what she had done. She nodded quietly, a small smile on her face, grateful for their words but modest in her response. Over the next few days, the bikers became occasional visitors. They didn't overstay or disrupt the restaurant. Instead, they offered small acts of help and kindness. They repaired a broken window frame, polished some of the metal fixtures outside, and even shared tips on security measures to keep the restaurant safe. Their actions were thoughtful, respectful, and careful not to draw unnecessary attention. The woman watched them work, quietly appreciating the care and effort they put into their gestures. These interactions taught her a great deal. She began to see the bikers not as intimidating figures, but as people with their own codes of honor, loyalty, and respect. They were fiercely protective of those they considered family, and they valued trust and integrity above all else. Her actions had earned her a place in that circle, even if it was small, and she realized that this kind of respect was more meaningful than any awards or recognition she could imagine. Meanwhile, the restaurant's reputation continued to grow. People from nearby neighborhoods started visiting, eager to hear the story firsthand or simply to experience the warmth and courage that had become associated with the place. The woman welcomed them all, treating each customer with the same care and attention as always. She never boasted about what she had done, letting her actions speak for themselves, but she began to notice a change in how people interacted with her. There was a new level of respect, a sense that they were witnessing someone who had stood firm in her values. One day, a local journalist visited, hoping to write a small piece about the restaurant and its unusual visitors. The woman was hesitant at first. She didn't want her story to become sensationalized or misrepresented, but after a quiet conversation with the journalist, she agreed to share her experience honestly, focusing on the human side of the events rather than the drama. She talked about courage, kindness, and the unexpected bonds that could form when people acted with integrity. The article was published a few days later, and it brought even more attention to the restaurant. But unlike the fear and tension she had imagined, the response was overwhelmingly positive. People admired her for her bravery and her humility. She received letters and notes from strangers, thanking her for standing up for what was right and for showing that small acts of courage could have a big impact. The woman read each note carefully, touched by the sincerity and warmth of the words. Despite the attention, life at the restaurant continued much as it had before. The woman maintained her daily routine, waking early, preparing food, cleaning, and serving customers. She valued the simplicity of her work, the rhythm of her days, and the connections she made with people one plate at a time. But now there was an added layer of meaning to her efforts. She realized that courage, respect, and human connection could ripple outward in ways she had never imagined, and that her small acts had created a positive impact beyond the walls of her restaurant. One afternoon, as she was arranging flowers on a table, a young biker approached her quietly. "I just wanted to say something," he said hesitantly. "We've been talking about you in our group. Not many people act the way you do. Most are scared or turn away, but you showed strength and heart. That matters more than you know." The woman looked at him and smiled softly. "I didn't do it for recognition," she replied. "I did it because it was the right thing to do. Sometimes you just have to step up even when it's scary. That's all." He nodded, understanding the simplicity and power of her words. "That's why we respect you," he said, "and why we'll always have your back in our own way." He left quietly, leaving the woman to reflect on the significance of the conversation. She realized that respect, trust, and loyalty could exist in the most unlikely places, and that her actions had forged connections that transcended differences in lifestyle, appearance, and reputation. Over the following week, the restaurant experienced a quiet transformation. It remained a place of warmth, food, and conversation, but there was now a sense of protection and community that she had never felt before. She moved through her days with a quiet confidence, knowing that she had earned respect from people she had once feared. She understood that courage was not about grand gestures or dramatic confrontations. It was about standing firm in your values, showing compassion and acting with integrity. As evening fell, the woman closed the restaurant and walked home through the familiar streets of her neighborhood. The city was calm, but she felt a quiet energy inside her, a sense that her life had changed in ways she could not yet fully understand. She thought about the bikers, the customers, and the connections she had formed over the past few days. She realized that her actions had created a ripple, one that would continue to grow, influencing people in ways she might never see. That night, as she lay in bed, she reflected on the lessons she had learned. Courage was quiet, humility was powerful, and respect could be earned through simple acts of integrity. She had discovered that human connection could transcend differences, and that standing up for what was right could lead to unexpected bonds and lasting trust. She felt a sense of fulfillment, knowing that her small acts had meaning far beyond her own life. She closed her eyes, thinking about the future. There would be challenges, unexpected events, and moments that tested her courage, but she felt ready. She had learned that fear could be met with calm, that respect could be earned through kindness, and that human connection could flourish even in the most unlikely places. Her restaurant was more than a place to eat. It was a symbol of courage, community, and the quiet power of doing what was right. The days passed, and the woman's restaurant continued to thrive in a way she had never imagined. People came not only for the food but also for the story of a woman who had stood up when it mattered, who had protected someone in need, and who had shown courage that reached far beyond the walls of her small restaurant. She noticed the subtle changes in how people treated her. There was respect in their eyes, curiosity mixed with admiration, and sometimes even a quiet awe. She didn't seek recognition, but she couldn't ignore the way her actions had touched others. One morning, she opened the restaurant as usual, arranging the tables and preparing the kitchen. The city outside was waking slowly, the sounds of traffic and distant voices blending into a familiar hum. She took a deep breath, savoring the quiet moments before the day began. And then, as she often did lately, she noticed movement outside. Motorcycles, some familiar, some new, were parked neatly along the street. A group of bikers had gathered again, this time seemingly in celebration rather than gratitude. Her heart raced, a mixture of nervousness and curiosity. She had learned not to fear these visitors, but there was always a small pulse of uncertainty when she saw them. The bell above the door jingled, and she stepped forward to greet them. They entered calmly, smiling and nodding at her in acknowledgement. She returned their gestures with a small smile, feeling a warmth spread through her chest. Their presence had become less intimidating over time, more like a symbol of respect and loyalty than anything else. The leader approached her again, this time carrying a small folder. "We've been talking among ourselves," he said quietly, "and we wanted to do something more, something to honor what you've done and the courage you've shown." He handed her the folder carefully. Inside were letters of gratitude, hand-drawn sketches, and personal notes from bikers she had met over the past few days. Each one told a story of respect, trust, and admiration. Some described moments from their lives, their struggles, and how her actions had reminded them of the importance of integrity and kindness. She sat down slowly, carefully reading through each note. Some made her laugh, others brought tears to her eyes. She realized that the small act she had taken, simply protecting someone in a tense moment, had created ripples far beyond what she could have imagined. These letters weren't just words on paper. They were a testament to the human connections that courage and kindness could create. The bikers stayed for a while, chatting quietly, sharing small stories about their lives. They spoke of loyalty, respect, and the bonds that held their group together. They were not just a club or a community. They were people who had chosen to honor certain values above all else. And somehow, in her simple act of protecting one man, she had earned a place in that world, a place built on mutual respect and understanding. Over the next few weeks, the restaurant's popularity grew. Locals who had once been hesitant now came frequently, wanting to experience the warmth and courage that had become part of the restaurant's identity. Some visitors came from further away, curious about the story they had heard through news articles or social media. The woman welcomed everyone with the same care and humility she always had, serving food and listening to conversations, never letting the attention change who she was. Her life, however, was not just about admiration. She continued to face the ordinary challenges of running a small business, ordering supplies, managing staff, handling finances. But now there was an added layer of meaning. Every plate of food she served, every smile she shared carried a sense of purpose. She understood that courage wasn't only about dramatic moments or tense standoffs. It was about consistency, integrity, and small acts that reinforced the values she believed in. One evening, as she was closing the restaurant, she reflected on everything that had happened. The memory of the police outside, the man in the leather jacket, the bikers who had come to show respect, they were all part of a story that had changed her life. She realized that courage and kindness could create lasting bonds, not only with people she knew but also with strangers, communities, and even worlds she had never imagined entering. She thought about the conversations she had shared with the bikers, the lessons she had learned from them, and the way her actions had inspired others. Respect, she realized, was a currency more valuable than money or fame. It could cross boundaries, erase prejudices, and create connections that were rare in the modern world. She had been given that respect, and in turn, she had given it back in her own way, through courage, integrity, and compassion. As the days turned into weeks, the restaurant became a symbol in the neighborhood. People spoke of it not only for the food but for the story, for the courage that had been shown within its walls. New friendships formed, old customers grew closer, and the woman found herself part of a community that extended far beyond her expectations. The bikers would come occasionally, quietly, always respectful, reinforcing the bonds that had begun with one simple act. One afternoon, a young woman came into the restaurant, hesitant and nervous. She had heard about the woman's courage and wanted to meet her. "I just wanted to say thank you," she said softly. "You reminded me that standing up for what's right is worth it even when it's scary. I hope I can be brave like you one day." The woman smiled, placing a reassuring hand on the young visitor's shoulder. "You already have that strength," she said gently. "Sometimes all it takes is one decision, one choice to act. That's where courage begins." The young woman nodded, clearly inspired, and left with a renewed sense of purpose. The woman watched her go, feeling a quiet satisfaction. Courage, she realized, could inspire others, creating ripples that extended far beyond her own life. Months later, she reflected on everything that had happened. Her restaurant had grown in reputation, yes, but more importantly, she had grown as a person. She had learned that bravery wasn't about fearlessness, it was about action in the face of fear. She had discovered that respect could be earned in the simplest of ways, and that human connections were strengthened by honesty, integrity, and compassion. She thought back to the man in the leather jacket, the police outside, and the bikers who had come to her restaurant. She remembered the fear, the tension, the uncertainty, and then the gratitude, the respect, and the unexpected bonds. It was a story she would carry with her forever, a reminder that one act of courage could change not only her life, but the lives of many others. Even now, years later, she could still picture the motorcycles parked outside her restaurant, the quiet nods of acknowledgement, the heartfelt letters, and the conversations that had taught her so much. Her life had not been dramatic or dangerous beyond those moments, but the impact of those events had been profound. She understood that her courage had created a legacy, one of respect, integrity, and human connection, that would last far beyond her own time.